Have you ever seen a creature with only hours to live, and then a miracle happens? Bailey, a golden retriever abandoned, forgotten, and destined for death. No one believed he deserved a chance. No one thought he could be saved. But at his most desperate moment, a stranger appeared and changed everything. Bailey has been given a second chance, but the ghosts of his past have not let him go. Someone is trying to get him back. Why? What is the truth behind Bailey's past? And can he find freedom? Before we continue, leave us a comment telling us where in the world you are watching this video from. And if you believe in heartwarming stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel now, because tomorrow there will be a very special story for you. Have you ever seen a creature with only a few hours left to live? A heart that still beats, a pair of eyes that still see. But the world around it has decided that it is no longer worth it. This is the story of Bailey, a golden retriever forgotten by the world. Bailey was born in a small house in the Texas suburbs, where he once had a warm home, a soft blanket, and hands that used to caress him. But then, because of a small defect, his back legs were not perfect. His owners gave him up. They said he would never run as fast as other dogs, that he was no longer worth it. And so, they took him to a rescue center, where creatures like him waited for a miracle that might never come. At the rescue center, Bailey soon learned a cruel truth. Every day, the iron doors opened, and other dogs were chosen. The lively puppies, the bright eyes, the big, strong, silky-haired dogs, they were all taken. But no one stopped at Bailey's kennel. No one looked at him for long. No one asked, "Can he have a chance?" Bailey could only stand silently, watching each person pass by, his heart growing heavier with each passing moment. And then, as the days of waiting stretched into weeks and months, Bailey began to understand. He had no one. No one wanted him. And he stopped hoping. Have you ever seen a dog give up on life before he died? Bailey no longer wagged his tail when people passed by. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He didn't try to attract attention. He just lay there, a lost soul in his own body. He learned not to expect anything. He didn't expect to be loved, not expecting anyone to stop, kneel, and say, "Good boy, you're safe now." Bailey's long nights in the cage had only faded dreams of a distant home where he had once been held. But now, he wasn't even sure if he had ever belonged. The rescue station was overflowing. The lists hanging on the wall were updated daily. Bailey's name had been there for a long time, but now it had been crossed out with a cold pen. What did that mean? It meant that Bailey had been here too long, and there was no longer a place for him. Tomorrow morning, before the sun rose, he would be given the euthanasia drug. This time, Bailey didn't have to pretend to be strong. He didn't cry. He didn't struggle. He didn't whine. It just huddled in the corner of the cage, curling up into the smallest circle possible, as if it wanted to disappear before it happened. And in the quiet of the night, in the cold darkness, only its faint sighs could be heard, like a final farewell to life. But then, the phone at the rescue station rang. A desperate voice came over the line. "Please, don't do anything. I'll be there tomorrow morning." Bailey slept on, unaware that fate had just turned in an instant. And tomorrow, when that door opened, it wouldn't be a staff member giving the injection. It would be a stranger with a heart big enough to believe that Bailey still deserved a chance. If you've made it this far, it means you have a seed of love for the little creatures. Bailey was once abandoned by the world, but tomorrow he will know what true love is. What do you think? Can a dog who has lost all hope learn to trust humans again? Keep watching to see the miracle happen. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to leave a like to spread compassion. Have you ever felt like in a moment your whole life was about to take a completely different turn? Just a photo, a pair of empty eyes, a message as cold as a death sentence, and then a decision. Quick, strong, without hesitation. Maggie didn't know why she felt such a strong urge. She had seen Bailey's before, but this time, something was different. Maybe it was the way the little dog curled up, as if to disappear. Maybe it was his eyes. No fear, no expectation, just resignation. Like he had accepted that his life no longer had any meaning. Maggie couldn't let that happen. Without hesitation, she grabbed her car keys and rushed out the door. But would she make it in time? It was nighttime. The streets were deserted, yellow lights stretching across the cold asphalt. The car was going faster than it should have, but Maggie didn't care. In her mind, there was only Bailey. She pictured him lying alone in his stall, unaware that in a few hours, a cold syringe would end it all. Maggie couldn't let that happen. She gripped the steering wheel, pressing harder on the gas pedal. But fate was never easy for those who were racing against time. Up ahead, a red light suddenly appeared. Maggie stopped. Red light. 40 seconds. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. Each second that passed felt like a knife stabbing at her heart. She wanted to scream, to bend every rule to get to Bailey faster. But she couldn't. All she could do was wait. Wait desperately, just like Bailey had. When the light turned green, she took off as if the universe was urging her to make it. The gates of the shelter came into view. Maggie jumped out of the car and ran straight inside. "I'm here to adopt Bailey." The clerk looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "Who are you?" "I called last night. I'll bring him home." The air went quiet for a second. The clerk glanced at her watch. 6:47 a.m. 13 minutes left. Without another word, she stood up and walked quickly toward the steel doors that led to the back area. Maggie followed, her heart pounding in her chest. They walked past rows of cages where other dogs were starting their day. Some wagged their tails happily at the sight of the stranger. Others barked loudly. But one cage was completely silent. There, a small dog curled up in the corner of its cage, eyes closed. Bailey. But what made Maggie's heart clench was not its silence, but the fact that the cage door was half open. Another employee stood inside, clutching a collar. Beside him, a small syringe sat on the table. Bailey waited his turn. Without thinking, Maggie rushed forward, kneeling in front of the cage, her hands shaking. "Bailey!" The small dog started slightly, eyes opening slowly. It looked at Maggie, not with excitement, but with a pained indifference. "Bailey, let's go home." She gently held out her hand, waiting. And then, for the first time in a long time, Bailey moved, not out of fear, not out of survival instinct, because in Maggie's eyes, there was something different. No judgment, no pity, just pure warmth, a safety he had never known. And Bailey took a step forward. One step, then another, until his head touched Maggie's hand. At that moment, everything changed forever. Do you believe in fate? Some encounters are not accidental. Some souls find each other at the right time, as if the universe had planned it. Bailey had lost faith, but in that moment, he knew. Someone wanted him to exist, not because he was perfect, not because he was cuter than the others, but because he deserved to be loved despite his flaws. Bailey was saved at the last minute, but thousands of other dogs out there may not be so lucky. Bailey's story is not just about a dog. It's about kindness, about patience, about believing that no matter how broken a creature is, it still deserves a second chance. And if you've followed this story this far, it means you have a big heart, a person who believes in the good, and that every life is worthy of respect. What do you think? Can Bailey learn to trust humans again? Keep following this story. And if you feel it touches your heart, leave a like to spread kindness to more people. Some wounds are not on the skin, but on the soul. Bailey has been saved. But can a dog who has lost faith learn to love again? The real journey has only just begun. Home, but home? Maggie stepped out of the rescue shelter door, Bailey's leash in her hand. She could feel the little dog trembling beside her. Unlike other dogs who are adopted, excited, barking, wagging their tails, Bailey just followed quietly, as if he still couldn't believe it was real. On the way home, he curled up in the car, eyes wide open, looking out the window. Perhaps, at that moment, he was wondering, where am I going? Is this time different? Maggie glanced at Bailey. You'll be fine, little one. But she knew. Bailey couldn't believe it right away. Maggie opened the door, gently unclipping the leash. Bailey stood still, not stepping in right away. Her little feet paused on the threshold, as if she were used to being turned away. There were no bars in the apartment, no loud barking, no cold smell of antiseptic. But Bailey didn't move. How could a creature believe in freedom when it had spent its entire life in a cage? Maggie didn't push. She took a few steps back, waiting patiently. You don't have to rush, Bailey. But if you want to know what a home is like, now is the time. Bailey looked at her, a slow, skeptical look, but with a faint hope somewhere in it. And then she stepped in. For the first time, she walked into a home without threats, without judgment. But that didn't mean he felt safe. That first night, Bailey didn't dare lie down on the soft mattress Maggie had prepared. Instead, he curled up in the corner of the room, close to the wall, where he could observe everything, but not let anyone touch him. He didn't touch his food bowl. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't show any happiness. He just existed. And Maggie understood. She had seen animals hurt many times in her career, but she had never seen a dog so afraid of its happiness. She sat down, kept her distance, and said softly, Bailey, you don't have to trust me right away. But I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. She knew that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be built over time, with patience, with sincerity. The first day passed without any change. On the second day, Bailey still lay quietly in the corner of the room, but this time, he kept an eye on Maggie. On the third day, when Maggie called his name, Bailey's ears twitched slightly. On the fifth day, he watched her from afar, though he still didn't dare to come closer. And then, on the seventh day, when Maggie sat on the floor, reading a book as usual, Bailey suddenly stood up. She didn't dare to breathe loudly. He walked closer. Then slowly, he put his head on her leg. At that moment, Maggie's heart burst with happiness. Bailey opened his heart for the first time, not because anyone forced him, not because he needed something, but because he wanted to trust again. Bailey was still not a completely normal dog. He still jumped when he heard a loud sound. He still hesitated when someone reached out. It still took time to feel safe. But most importantly, he was no longer as afraid as before. Maggie knew that each day would be a lesson, a small step forward in his healing journey. She didn't need Bailey to be perfect. She just needed him to know that he was worthy of love, in whatever form it took. Do you see? Bailey wasn't just a dog. Bailey was the image of souls who had been hurt, who had been abandoned, who had believed they were worthless. But even in the darkest of times, if someone reached out, if someone was patient enough, if someone believed in rebirth, miracles could happen. And you, who have followed this story this far, are a person with a big heart. Someone who has enough love to see the value of every living being, no matter how small or flawed. Bailey's story is more than just a rescued dog. It's a reminder that we can be miracles in someone's life. And if this story touches your heart, please share it, so more people can see that every life deserves a second chance. Have you ever felt like happiness was just within reach when a shadow came? Bailey had begun to trust. He had learned to wag his tail, to walk closer without fear. But fate does not let those who have been hurt go easy. And then the past returned, threatening to take away everything Bailey had just found. The mysterious call. Maggie sat silently, phone in hand. The voice on the other end of the line was cold, as if the man was keeping a secret she did not know. You think you saved him? Bailey is no ordinary dog. Maggie clenched the phone. Who are you? What do you want? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke, slowly but meaningfully. I just want you to know. Someone will come looking for him. And then the call ended. Maggie sat there, feeling uneasy. Who would want to take back an abandoned dog? And why did she get the feeling that Bailey belonged somewhere else? Somewhere he never wanted to go back. That night, Maggie noticed that Bailey was different. He no longer followed her from room to room like he used to. He didn't put his head on her lap anymore. Instead, he sat by the door, quietly looking out, and then he started growling. Maggie had never heard Bailey growl before. She moved closer, looking out the window. A black car is parked across the street. No movement. No one got out. But Maggie knew. Someone was watching them. Bailey knew it too. Some memories didn't need to be spoken, but they were there, deeply ingrained. Maggie knelt beside Bailey, placing her hand on his back. What did you run from? Bailey couldn't answer, but her eyes said it all. She knew who those people were, and she didn't want to go back there. Maggie couldn't sleep. She went online, searching for any information she could find about Bailey. And then she found an old newspaper article. Police raid illegal dog fighting ring, but many animals are still missing. Maggie felt her heart constrict. Bailey had been a dog fighter? It couldn't be. How could a small, gentle, scared golden retriever have belonged to a world of blood and violence? But then, something in the article made her freeze. Some of the puppies had been sold before the police arrived. And one of them, maybe Bailey. She remembered the faint scars on his legs, the shivers in the night, the fear of loud noises. Bailey had not just been abandoned. He had belonged to a place he never wanted to return to. Maggie couldn't let that happen. She didn't know who those people were, but she knew one thing for sure. They would come back. And if they thought they could get Bailey back, they were wrong. Bailey wasn't a commodity. He wasn't a fighter in a war that wasn't his. For the first time in his life, Bailey had a real home, and Maggie wasn't going to let anyone take him away. She held Bailey tight, whispering, "No one is going to take you away from me." And for the first time since coming home, Bailey snuggled into her, closed his eyes, and trusted completely. How many dogs are like Bailey? How many have been treated like objects, as tools, as disposable objects? How many Baileys are still waiting for someone like Maggie to come into their lives? If you've made it this far, you have a big heart. You know that compassion can change a life. Bailey once thought it was worthless, but just because one person believed in it, everything changed. And maybe, somewhere out there, there's someone who needs you too. Someone you may never have met, but is still waiting for you to save them. Leave a short comment. Just one sentence is fine, to show the world that you believe in kindness. If you've ever had your freedom taken away, been treated like a possession that could be taken away at any time, what would you do when you finally got it back? Bailey had been abandoned, forgotten, considered worthless, but this time it wouldn't be taken away again. And Maggie knew that this wasn't just about Bailey anymore. It was about justice, love, and standing up for the weakest of creatures. After that threatening phone call, Maggie felt her apartment was no longer safe. The black car parked across the street still appeared every night. Even though no one stepped out, Maggie knew they were watching. They were waiting for a moment of vulnerability. She could feel the unease creeping into Bailey's every breath. At night, he didn't sleep, but lay close to the door, eyes wide, alert in the dark. Perhaps, somewhere in her subconscious, she remembered the days of captivity, the nightmares from the past. Maggie knelt beside Bailey, placing her hand on his back. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. I'm here." Bailey couldn't speak, but she understood. And for the first time, she closed her eyes without trembling. There are battles we can't avoid. We can only face them. And Maggie knew that moment was coming. The next morning, Maggie decided to stop running away. She stepped out, heading straight for the black car. The car door opened. A man got out, about 50 years old, thin, but with cold eyes. "I know who you are." The man smiled faintly. "Then you also know why I came here." "Bailey doesn't belong to you anymore," Maggie said firmly. "Oh, but you're wrong." He took a step forward, his voice low. "It's my property." Maggie felt her blood boil. She clenched her fists, looking straight into his eyes. "It's not property. It's a life." The man shrugged. "It was in our hands, and now we want it back." "No," Maggie said firmly. "If you come here again, I'll call the police." The man laughed, but his confidence was gone. He turned and walked back to his car. "You can't keep it forever. We'll see who wins." And then he left. But Maggie knew the fight wasn't over. Maggie knew that emotions alone weren't enough. She needed proof, something strong enough to make sure Bailey would never be taken again. She went back to the veterinary hospital where she worked. She asked a coworker to check Bailey's microchip. And then the truth came out. Bailey had been registered under a different name, but not to a family, not to a kind owner, to an illegal dog farm that supplied dogs to illegal dog fighting rings. Maggie choked. She had suspected, but she hadn't expected the truth to be so cruel. Bailey had escaped, but if she didn't act now, he might be dragged back into that hell all over again. Maggie didn't hesitate any longer. She sent all the evidence to the police. She contacted an animal rights organization that had fought against such cruel rings. Bailey would not be the first dog to be treated like a commodity, but she would not let him be the next to be taken from her. 2 days later, the police arrested the ringleaders. And this time, they could not escape. Bailey was no longer afraid. He was no longer being hunted. He was free, forever. That night, when Maggie returned home, Bailey was changed, no longer wary, no longer trembling. He approached her, looking deeply into her eyes with grateful, trusting eyes. Then, as if he had been waiting for this moment, he lifted his front paw and placed it gently in Maggie's palm. Maggie could not stop the tears from welling up in her eyes. "You're free, Bailey. No one can hurt you anymore." Bailey wagged his tail. No more fear, no more doubt. For the first time in his life, he was truly himself. Did you know? If you've made it this far, you're a special person. You believe in kindness. You believe that the world can be better. You believe that every living thing, no matter how broken, deserves a second chance. And maybe, somewhere in the world, there's someone just like Bailey, waiting for someone like you to save them. What do you think of Bailey's journey? Bailey has found a true home, not just a place to stay, but a place to love, to trust, and to live a full life. But is this simply the story of a golden retriever? Or is it also a mirror reflecting ourselves? How many people out there have been hurt, have lost faith in the world, have thought they were worthless? But then, with just an outstretched hand, a heart that dares to love unconditionally, miracles can happen. And that miracle can come from you. We know, if you have watched until this minute, you are not an insensitive person. You are a person with deep love, a person who believes that kindness can change the world. And as long as this world has more people like you, it will become warmer and kinder. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here until this moment. If this story touches your heart, please take a second to like and share to spread this humane message to more people. And if you could rate this story from 0 to 10, how much would you give it? There are many more profound and meaningful stories waiting for you ahead. Stories that will make you think, will move your soul, will help you see the world with different eyes. Are you ready to continue this journey? Click to watch the next video to discover an emotional story right now.